Good evening, and welcome again to Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott, and you've heard me say often on this show that all politics is local. So tonight we'll be talking local politics with Nathaniel George Booker, village trustee in the village of Maywood.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure to have you here. So let's start with a little bit about your background, which we were just talking about before the show, which I think is really interesting because you were just recently elected to the village board, right?
Yes.
So you've been in for, what, a year and a half?
No, May of this year.
Oh, May of this year? Oh,
yeah,
my goodness.
So just got
brand
sworn
newbie,
in. I am
huh?
6 months in.
Wow. Welcome to the world of politics.
You know, it's been quite the experience.
Is it what you expected?
You know, I think from being involved and engaged in the community overall, just as an advocate, it's been sometimes exactly what you expected. Sometimes you get a little surprise, but then it's also, if you're not a part of the problem, I mean, if you're not a part of the solution, you're part of the problem.
Right, right.
So trying to find those solution-oriented things that can be done to alleviate some of that disappointment at times.
Yeah, I myself have been elected in local boards, and it's always different when you get inside and you see how it really works.
When you get the real board packet.
You get the real board packet, right, right. And you get the real stories from the attorneys who are telling you why you're getting sued.
And yes, so when closed sessions are quite entertaining and interesting at times. And you definitely, as a community member, you can advocate for a lot of things, but you truly don't know what you don't know when you start getting down into the budget, when you start getting down into why the taxes are the way that they are and the backstories. And I think the beauty of once you become elected and learning the history of how everything, because you'll think, oh, I found the solution to something. And you're like, yeah, that's going to take a good 10, 15 years to get to that solution at times. But then you look at it and you say, well, how did we get here? And you'll go back, and once you research everything, it'll have started back in the 90s or the 80s. So it's just like, yeah, so, I mean, if you're able to fix it within 5 to 10 years over a 30-year-old problem,
that's
then
a great
kudos
success.
to you, right? So
right.
that's the part that's becoming more interesting.
So which 30-year-old problems are you trying to tackle now?
Oh, property taxes, pensions, water rates, infrastructure, bills that went unpaid for some time at different times. So say, for instance, we had where some of our pensions for a few years went unpaid or very lowly paid. So if you're ignoring millions of dollars in payments a year,
you're going to run out of money.
Eventually,
yes.
maybe that political arena did not have to deal with that issue, but here we are 20 years later, still dealing with something that happened well before we were even interested in running for office. And you know, the community doesn't care.
They just know what's now.
They just know right now.
Right.
My taxes went up $200. My property taxes went up $200 from last year. My property taxes went up $300 from last year. And you're already one of the highest tax communities in Cook County. So.
And actually, I want to come back to that because you know, I live close to Maywood, and I know I've been through Maywood many times, and I have friends who live in Maywood. And it's hard to believe that Maywood is one of the highest taxed communities in the area because there are serious infrastructure problems you mentioned.
Absolutely.
The downtown area needs revitalization. There's a lot of signs of neglect in Maywood, and you look at the property tax and you think, well, wait a minute, where's all that money going? I'm sure you get that question. I'm sure you got that on the campaign trail.
No, I mean, you look at it from the standpoint, the reality is when you look at what the clerk's office evaluates when it comes to the 134 communities that represent Cook County, Maywood is number 126 out of 134. We're in the bottom 10% when it comes to some of the highest property taxes in Cook County. We are by far the highest taxed in Proviso Township, but in Cook County overall, if you look at the communities, we're in the bottom 10.
Okay.
So when you look at it from that standpoint, you do wonder, where's all the money going? And I can tell you, a lot of it's going to pensions. You know, people are living longer. You have people who work as maybe a retired police officer, so now we're putting them on the public works department, so now they're getting double pensioned. You deal with those issues. And again, you have the fact of, so I'll say in the late 90s, you'll have for like 6 or 7 years, just, you know, we weren't paying into the pensions until some of these local laws and, you know, compliance came into play. You know, people were allowed to do, or communities were allowed to do how they wanted to do things. You know, you have, when the crash happened, 2009, we had a lot of different investments that were made into the community, a lot of properties that were getting bought up for future thought processes of what we were going to do and what the plan was going to do. You look at Maywood as a whole. Maywood changed their form of government from full-time mayoral to part-time mayor and full-time village manager back in the late 70s. And since then, you just look at the trickle effect of there's never really been a long-term mayor that's been able to see through a plan. So when you look at villages like Hillside or Bellwood or Melrose Park, and you see things, you know, thriving and taking place and good choices being made to community prosperity, you know, you have those mayors that have been there for some time, and you have those strategic plans that they drew up years ago that they've still just been working on. And even if a new administration comes in, it's a better torch passing than happens in Maywood, you know.
Well, Maywood, there's a lot of political rivalry in
unique
Maywood.
Environment.
Well, there's lots of environments like that around the country, and I think even around the Chicago area. But it's true that there's, I mean, I've seen it in Maywood where one faction thinks the other faction is completely wrong, and so depending on who's in power at what time, things can flip 180 degrees. And that, as you point out, that's bad for continuity of long-term projects.
Yeah. I mean, you think of, and you know, when you look at our infrastructure and you look at our roads, take for instance back in the 2000s when you saw Bellwood, Stone Park, Hillside, all the communities redoing their infrastructure through funding that was allotted for. You know, sometimes when you have boards that are infighting, you kind of didn't apply for that grant or you didn't get that funding. And I think over time, Maywood just has continued to, in different ways, hurt themselves. Like sometimes you think the thought process, like now being in for 6 months, sometimes when you're really looking at it, you really do say to yourself, like, we truly are our own worst enemy.
Well, recognizing that is a good first step, right?
Oh, yeah.
Now there are, you know, boards come and go, and there are people on the board who've been there for a while, and newcomers like yourself, and the mayor who's been, what, her third term now, I think?
This is Mayor's second term.
Second term.
So if she runs again for 2021, it'll be her third term. But she's been in office for over 20 years at this point, because she was a trustee first.
She was a trustee for her as well. So as the new kid on the block, how do you have an effect in that environment?
You know, so I look at it from the standpoint, if you look at our board from 4 years ago to today, you know, you had a board that 7 votes, 6 trustees, 1 mayor, where you had 4 of them that were above the age of 70. Today, when you look at our board, you have 4 that are under the age of 40. So there's the last 2 elections have been a good dynamic and a good switch. So being the new kid on the block, how do you direct those changes? One thing that I've definitely identified in looking at our community versus other communities are we did not have, or we don't have committees or commissions in place to the capabilities that we could, right? So you think about from the Village of Maywood, your board meetings are so long. Yeah, well, if we had committees or commissions to put certain topics to, it wouldn't drag out. So for the first time, we actually just updated some of our ordinance. So I wrote rewrote some of our ordinance in regards to what the Beautification Commission will focus on. We just passed that about 2 months ago. This last board meeting we just had passed an ordinance in regards to updating what our Economic Development Commission will focus on and what our purpose and goals are.
So you're expanding their purview, essentially?
Well, it's giving it meat. Like have you ever had somebody that just eats on the side dish and you're like, so you're not eating the meat, right? So some of our commissions, 1, did not have a trustee liaison attached to it. 2, you had people who had been expired for years. They had not reported anything to the board for years. So those types of things are reshaping. So say, for instance, I'll give you one example, Economic Development Commission. Right. The Economic Development Commission started when 2014, when there was a comprehensive plan that was put in place for the Village of Maywood.
And that was organized by the village board at the trustees?
Yep.
Okay.
So there was community meetings and different things like that that took place, and a company came from the outside and put together the plan. So during that time, you look at it from the standpoint of there has not been one single recommendation from that commission in 5 years.
You mean that's been implemented?
That has been recommended.
Oh, really?
Yes.
So there's a commission's working on this plan for 5 years.
They have not been working on the plan. There's a thing. You look at it, there were 19 different commissions for the Village of Maywood, and then when we dust everything off and look at everything, you had 40 people that were expired.
Expired meaning their term expired?
Meaning that their 2-year terms, their terms have been expired without being renewed, and about 70 vacancies of who
Wow.
were supposed to be on those commissions. So
So they were essentially dysfunctional. They just weren't doing anything.
just
Yeah.
there to have it on the website.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Right?
Take up space.
You know,
Right.
so what, and actually that was part of one of the reasons that I ran for office, because when I got appointed to the Economic Development Commission, I'm thinking we're going to do some things that are great for the community while I'm still just a regular community advocate, and seeing how we weren't doing anything. That was definitely one of the check marks that made me run for office. So today, I'm happy to say, of all 6 trustees, we definitely all now are liaisons to different commissions for the first time.
So there's no commission that doesn't have a
Well,
trustee.
what we did was the first round of focus commissions, right?
Okay.
So right now, I mean, you have some commissions that are commissions of accessibility, or you have one commission that's community relations, and then you have commission that's public relations. And it's like,
what's
let's
the difference?
consolidate
Yeah,
these types of things. You'll have a commission that focuses on beautification, and then you have a commission that focuses on graffiti. And it's like, so what it came down to was you're looking at different trustees and different boards at different times created different ordinances without looking at the actual code of what currently, what already existed.
Yeah.
So in this way, the 3 commissions that I definitely did some thought process in putting together consolidation, revitalization, and how we can do the best that we want to do is community one focuses on energy and infrastructure. So energy and environment is the one commission that we're focused on, and right now that project with the trustee that's working on that is focusing on solar.
Bringing solar power into
Thinking
Maywood.
about how to utilize solar within our community, how to utilize solar within our municipal buildings, things like that. So that's one great thing that's taking place right now. Beautification is the commission that I'm focused on, which is more so public works, code enforcement. Because the reality is, when you think about you want to revitalize a business district, you want to gain interest into coming into the community. Well, if you have business owners or potential prospects coming in and seeing that you don't have necessarily pride in where you live, it's not the best look, right?
Sure.
So that's a big focus, and economic beautification, planning and zoning, those types of things. Finance. For a long time, there was no finance committee. So
No finance committee
for the village.
Wow.
Yeah. So we, one of our trustees, who actually is a business owner in the community, Trustee Sanchez, awesome guy. He was the chairman for the finance committee, and we're now going through like tax levy raising. We're going through funding, fiscal responsibility, goal setting, measurement setting, accountability for our different departments. So it's been really a great 6 months. There could be a lot more going on, but I look forward to coming into 2020 knocking and swinging.
That's the attitude, right?
I'm 6 months in now, so it's a little bit like, okay, navigation has gotten a little bit better, and relationship building. Like that's the biggest part about being on the board. There is no, like, you're one person, but the thing about the Village of Maywood, we're not broken up in districts like some communities are, where you'll have, this is my area, right? So we're all at large trustees. So when you look at we're all at large,
I mean, you're all responsible for the whole
a
village.
resident that's looking at you that is in zone map 4 or in zone map 3, 1 or 2, they could care less where you live because you're an at-large trustee. So I think in order to get things done, you definitely need to make sure that you have a more cohesive board that wants to work together, regardless of if you ran independent or what party you ran with. Like, so you think about what are those things that we cannot politicize and actually get done. And I think the great thing is we're making great headway with the commissions.
Well, it also sounds like there's a lot of new blood. I mean, how many new people were elected in your election?
2.
So 2 out of 6.
2 out of the 6 were new. So, but then when you look at the previous election before, there were another 2, right?
Okay,
so then when you looked at the election before that, there was 3. So myself and Trustee Miguel Jones are the ones that just got on. So we're both in our 30s. Then you had, in the previous election, Trustee Kenyatta Wellington and then Trustee Sanchez that came on. So now all of us are still operating in our first term. And then the only incumbent that came back in was Trustee Isaiah Brandon. So he's in his 2nd term right now.
Yeah, but he's young as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely the 4 under 40, Isaiah falls in that as well. We had, well, the thing was, there were 11 candidates that ran in this last election for trustee, for 3 seats.
For 3 seats.
Yeah, so Isaiah was the only incumbent that ran. So we had Ron Rivers and Henderson Yarbrough, who both were those trustees that were in their 70s that stepped away.
Yeah.
And so I was thankful enough, got endorsements passing the torch, and still have great conversations with them.
And I think it's admirable when
yeah.
people reach a point in their lives where they realize, look, it's time to turn it over to the
Isn't
next
it?
generation. Yeah, because it is.
Because sometimes you say like, well, you're running again, huh? Well, what is the plan?
Yeah, what's different this time?
Did you develop anybody over the past few years that you think you could pass it on to? No? Okay, you're just going to run again? Okay.
But at some point, you know, you become, I mean, and I know as I get older, you know, you become, you do get locked into certain ways of thinking. And the worst thing is you start to think you're right. And so you need other people to come in who have a different way of looking at things to really say, no, let's look at it from this other angle as well.
And I think the beautiful part about the board that we have now is we all, for the most part, get along, but we definitely all have very different thought processes
and that's
on
healthy.
How to get things done. And, you know, it's healthy when everyone has ideas of actual things that could be done, not just conversation of possibilities.
Yeah.
When you've actually gone through the process of putting together a plan of saying, hey, this is my plan, what's yours, and finding a middle and saying, okay, let's execute on that. So say, for instance, with the Economic Development Commission, we had, in rewriting the proposal, so I wrote the proposal, but you know, you had this trustee that had an idea with it, you had this trustee that had an idea with it, and I'm like, okay, let's change that. Well, that makes sense. Or nope, I don't want to change that. So you know, you have to have those healthy conversations to get to positive results, but you have to make sure that those things are not just grandstanding aspects, but more so beneficial and resolution built.
Well, and what I found in my own experience as well is building trust amongst the board members, that, you know, I'm going to listen to your idea because I know you're trying to come up with an idea that you think really makes sense, not that's just, as you put it, political grandstanding.
Yeah.
No, this is something that can work.
That we can do this.
We can do this.
Yes.
And here's why it's a good idea. And as long as you can be at a point where you can have those kinds of interchanges, then yeah, you can make real progress on a board.
Absolutely. I think that, like I said, so right now we're also looking at our spending accounts. So Maywood has this unique environment where we have individual spending accounts where we just use taxpayer money on things that we think are important to us. So sometimes you'll say like, oh, this is a nice block party that's happening, so let me just
throw some money at it.
Let me throw some money at it. Or, you know, this is a nice group of seniors and let me just take them a couple of places. But so we're thinking about consolidating that to just being one account that focuses on education and development and overall community engagement. It's not your personal account. It's not your personal bank.
Right.
It's not your slush fund.
Yeah.
It's not your political account for you to do things with.
Yeah.
But we definitely want to make sure that we're engaging the community in a proactive, positive way as a whole, as a board. And then we also want to make sure that we're taking advantage of, you know, education and development aspects. So like we just all six of us went to the National League of Cities conference in San Antonio. And, you know, that was phenomenal. But we want to make sure we keep those things going, but not in such a siloed way. So
well, and I would think that you want to get to the point where the board as a whole would say, even if it is support of a senior center, well, the board would consider it as a whole and say, look, here's how this benefits our community.
Yes.
And this is why this is a good use of taxpayer dollars.
Absolutely.
Right.
And then as a whole, as a board, you all, say if you were going to do a dinner, all 7 board members would actually be scheduled to show up, or you know,
well,
instead of just one showing up and then you finding out on Facebook that something took place. You're like, oh, that's nice.
Really?
Oh, you're using tax dollars for that. Oh, okay. You know, so it's
there's part of that borders not just on the unethical, but possibly illegal.
exactly.
So yes, having the board approve this kind of thing, and I'm sure having a finance committee
yes,
that will
I
go a
will
long
tell
way
you,
towards
that
getting
has
in this
been-
direction, right?
The finance committee has been quite interesting because again, when you're looking at overtime, when you're looking at duplicative spending, when you're looking at, you know, it could be something like the simplest things, like why are there 3 different departments printing from 3 different printing companies? You know,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
those types of simple
Right.
things that just don't make any sense. And you're like, oh, so we had 3 community events that did not come before the board, but we're coding them as something different. So why, that surely qualifies for a community event. Why is it coded as something? Oh, because we wanted to do it without board approval. Gotcha. So like those types of catches
Right,
that
right.
you're doing,
Yeah.
it definitely brings light to, you know, people say like we have a $34 million operating budget, and sometimes you guys are so into the, oh, that was $1,000, that was $500, that was $5,000, but the reality is those types of things add up, right?
They do, and
So-
there is well, this is why accountants become so important, and why they're sometimes called bean counters and all sorts of other derogatory things. But it's true. there is the big picture, and there are the strategic objectives. But it's true that a dollar saved is just as good as a dollar earned, and if you don't have to spend it, you can use it somewhere else, right? So yes, there is great value in understanding the detail level and watching every dollar.
Oh yeah.
But as you pointed out, you can't lose sight of the big objectives. You know, what are we trying to do here?
Yeah.
Right.
So we're getting to the point of I'm a big advocate. So my background is hospitality management. So Franklin Covey was drilled deeply into me.
Franklin
So
Covey?
Franklin Covey. So like you ever heard of like the seven disciplines of execution? Or
I should have, I'm supposed.
you know,
but
highly effective people.
okay, yeah.
Things like
oh,
that.
the 7 habits of highly effective people, that sort of thing. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So you have what they call the wildly important goals, right? So when you think about it from the community and from the board standpoint, I mean, we just had our first retreat with staff and the elected officials for the first time in probably a decade.
Wow.
And that was pretty good because what came out of it was something like really simple. So we started with, you know, what is the mission and the objectives and goals for the village of Maywood? And everyone had all these different thought processes, and it was like, well, it's on the village website, and it says it. Nobody could say when that was established as the vision and as the mission, and everyone agreed that that vision and mission did not reflect where we are today in 2019. So those types of things, of conversation pieces, when you have staff and a board working together, I think that's another great thing that we're starting to do now. Is in a way you look at it when we first got in, you looked at it like, oh, that's them and this is us. And it's like, well, that's not quite how this thing works, you know?
because we're all here in Maywood, so it's all us.
So,
Right?
again, the goal-setting aspect of where we want to be. What is the return on investments for purchasing things? Sticking within the budget. You know, a lot of things you say, like, how do we get to deficits? And, like, how did you get to this $8 million hole? Yeah, well, we got to it by just approving things without making sure that the funding was actually there. And approving things of saying, just because they said they needed it. Yeah, but did they put it in the budget for this year? They couldn't have needed it that bad, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So, or if you really do need it, find it in your budget. We're not just going to go over budget. And I think staying in line with the budget, this past fiscal year has been definitely, with the Finance Committee, has been great conversation in regards to staying in budget, because we can't we can't get out of the deficit if we keep going over budget and things.
No, you can't, and particularly at the local level. Those budget deficits kill you in the long run because,
yes.
you know, then you have to raise taxes to get out of the hole, and nobody,
that's what's been happening.
And nobody likes that, right? And it's
I don't like it. My property taxes get pretty high. So I don't like it at all. Try to make sure that it stays in place.
So what are some of the strategic goals that you guys have discussed?
So in focusing on, like I said, so in thinking about water rates, right? So how do we get down our water rates? What we started doing was focusing on the infrastructure and then also looking at the commercial, right? So when you look at it, say for instance, we have like Cintas, Loyola, Aetna, all of those big locations, and a report will come out later this at the beginning of the year, but none of them were paying their fair share when it came to water rate. I mean, even Maybrook Courthouse.
Using a lot of water and not paying for it.
ComEd. But it wasn't their fault, right?
So, sure, the rates had been set.
Our
right.
measurements, our tracking systems, the way that we build, that's on us, right? So we're fixing those areas. So the goal, the wildly important goal, just a simple statement, reduce the water rate. So then you look at it from different departments as their lead and lag measures. How do they go about making sure that that goal is accomplished? And, you know, it was meter readings. It was, you know, so one area, you know, goes for making sure all the meters are accurate and going into making sure that all the meters are accurate. Other departments, you know, getting an assessment of what are the big cracks that we have, what leaks do we have that is leaking into the ground.
Yeah, how much are we
focusing
losing,
on infrastructure,
right.
absolutely. Finance, focusing and looking at, you know, how many outstanding bills do we have that we've just allowed people to keep their water and haven't shut that off. I mean, we have some of the highest, we have the highest reconnection fee of about $250 to reconnect your water if your water gets shut off. You know, some communities have $25, $30 fees, but we weren't enforcing it to the best of our abilities. You know, and I think those types of things are definitely. I'll be very excited. Q1, Q2 next year to make some exciting announcements.
Now, who sets the actual rates? Is that the village board, or do you have to go through the county?
So we get our water from the city of Chicago. The city of Chicago transfers the water to us to Merrill's Park. So, and then Merrill's Park puts it out to different communities. There's the plant station that the transmission location is in Merrill's Park, and then we receive our water. So, in a way, we had a partnership with Merrill's Park where that actually is coming up to an end. So we'll have paid that all of that off. But either way, each month we get a bill from the city of Chicago.
And I bet that 3 or 4 years ago, you never thought you'd be here telling me how the water rates work in
You know,
Maywood, right?
if you looked at where I was three or four, so let's say 4 years ago, I was an area director for training and performance for the largest hotel chain company in the world in New York City. I was not in Chicago. So in
you
no
weren't
way
thinking about Maywood at all.
I would not be saying, hey, do you know last month we had the second lowest water rate in probably a decade of the water bill from the city of Chicago because of everything that we're doing. Isn't that exciting?
Yeah.
And you're like, it's a water bill, Nathaniel. But I'm like, but if you look at what that water rate for the month of October was last year versus where it is today, yes, that's exciting.
It is, because it's an accomplishment. It's something that,
Right.
that wasn't being paid attention to. And once you guys came in and started paying attention, you were able to make, it's a win, right?
So it's like, what do you count your wins? So like I said, 4 years ago, my win was we just opened this hotel and the staff is all excited. We just got Hotel of the Year out of 5,000 hotels and just beat them out. We're killing it. Like, so, and then you go, we got that water rate down with that same level of excitement. It's, you know, when you're, like I said, when you're walking in purpose and you're just focused on how can you make things better. I think in everything that I've done in my career, in life, whatever it's been, it's how can things get better? So I think I get enthusiastic about like the simple things because I say it's the little things that really mean everything.
It is, like water rates.
Yeah.
But I think coming back to what we were talking about earlier, the youthful energy, you know, bringing that kind of enthusiasm is really important. And there does come a time when if you've been there for 30 years, whatever, you tend to lose that. And so having the new enthusiasm come in and say, we can do this, we can make this better. And then you can, because you believe it. Right?
Yeah, we believe it and we work on it. You know, as what the Bible says, faith without work is dead, right? So when you say, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, it's not just a campaign promise. It's not something we're just saying on the campaign trail, we're knocking at a door. It's like, no, we're actually doing it. So it's like you put the faith towards it and believe that it can get done, but then you actually put the work to make sure that it gets done. And I think that's what our board is focused on, doing the work to get things done.
And have you been able to successfully convey that out to the electorate and they see this happening?
You know, I think for Maywood specifically, what we have to do is definitely do more community engagement. So we've definitely done more community engagement in more recent years than have ever happened because there's such a disconnect with the community. So I'll give you an example. We have 15,000 registered voters in the village of Maywood.
10 seconds left, so make it fast.
Okay, we got about 15,000 registered voters in the village of Maywood, and only 2,100 come out to vote.
Oh,
right? So it's like that's a disconnect.
Not connecting.
They'll come and not